The courtroom held its breath, frozen in time. The trial was nearing its end, and the judge's gavel hovered in the air, ready to pronounce a final judgment. Then, piercing the silence, a 12-year-old girl stood up and uttered 4 words that halted everything. He didn't do it. Those words, spoken by Eliana Torres, cut through the thick air like a blade. The prosecutor, Gregory Kane, twitched ever so slightly. A ripple of tension passed through the courtroom like a current. What Eliana had done wasn't just brave, it was dangerous. She had spoken a truth that powerful forces had worked hard to silence. And with that, she became their next target. Judge Aldrich froze, his gavel trembling slightly. A seasoned veteran of the bench, he rarely showed emotion, but now something flickered behind his eyes. Across the courtroom, Gregory Kane's calm demeanor darkened. He slowly turned, his stare finding the girl in the back row. Eliana's mother gasped, grabbing her daughter's wrist. "Sit down," she hissed. But Eliana didn't move. She had grown up hearing that justice didn't look the same for families like hers, that it bent easily for the powerful and crushed those without a voice. But Mr. Thomas, her favorite teacher, had once told her, truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to whisper. And Eliana had whispered. No, she had declared it. The next days were a whirlwind. News stations replayed the courtroom scene over and over. People asked, who was this girl? And why did she believe the accused, a beloved teacher named Jonathan Thomas, was innocent? Eliana didn't know all the answers. But she had a note. A small, crumpled piece of paper Mr. Thomas had given her 2 nights before the arrest. If something happens to me, don't trust what they say. Find the truth. That night haunted her. They'd met on a park bench near the old library. Mr. Thomas fed birds and smiled when she approached. But his eyes, usually so warm, looked tired. You ever wonder why people ignore what's right in front of them? He asked. She had frowned. Like what? Like how sometimes the truth is hidden in plain sight. Then he'd handed her the note and walked away. Now he was on trial, accused of embezzling over $2 million from a scholarship fund. But Eliana couldn't believe it. Not him. Her mother begged her to stay out of it. You're just a kid. You don't know how dangerous this is. Then I guess I better learn, Eliana replied. Driven by instinct and a deep sense of justice, Eliana began investigating. She slipped into the courtroom day after day, listening to the prosecutor list digital evidence, account transfers, offshore deposits, all pointing to Mr. Thomas. But it was all digital. No paper trails. No witnesses. Nothing physical. It didn't add up. One day, outside the courthouse, a teenager approached her. He was tall, quiet, and wary. Name's Leo, he said. My brother used to work for Kane. Until he found something. Then he vanished. No record he was ever there. Leo believed the case against Mr. Thomas was part of something bigger. And Eliana had the only lead. The note. It led them to a forgotten storage unit once used by a community outreach group Mr. Thomas supported. Inside, among dusty boxes and broken furniture, they found it, a leather-bound ledger. It held transactions, dates, names not of Mr. Thomas, but of Gregory Kane. Fraud stretching back years. The scope was breathtaking. But someone else knew. The door slammed shut. Men in suits. Searching. Leo and Eliana barely escaped, running through alleys as bullets shattered glass behind them. Now they knew. They weren't just chasing truth. They were running for their lives. They hid. They planned. They decoded. Leo traced digital footprints leading to shell companies tied directly to Kane. They had evidence, motive, everything. But the moment they tried to go public, the threats began. A car followed Eliana home. A masked figure tried to grab her in an alley. Only Leo's quick reflexes saved her. It was more than a courtroom battle now. It was a war. But Eliana wouldn't quit. With the ledger in her backpack and Leo at her side, she returned to court. The day felt different. Heavy. Kane smirked, smug and sure. Your Honor, he said, the evidence against Mr. Thomas is overwhelming. Then Eliana stood. There is reasonable doubt, and I can prove it. Gasps. Murmurs. Judge Aldrich peered down. Miss Torres, this is highly irregular. I know, but this isn't just about rules. It's about justice. She produced the ledger. Every transaction in this book leads back to one man. Gregory Kane. The room exploded. Kane laughed. A child? Your Honor, really? But then the recording played. Kane's voice erased the paper trail. Pin it all on the old man. A woman stood. Special Agent Valerie Monroe. Internal Affairs. We've been investigating this for months. That voice belongs to Mr. Kane. Kane lunged. Officers swarmed. "You think this ends here?" he shouted. "You think you won?" His eyes found Eliana. He smiled. "Clever girl. But the game isn't over." He was taken away in cuffs. Mr. Thomas, eyes brimming with tears, embraced Eliana. "You believed in me. You taught me to," she whispered. Outside the courthouse, Agent Monroe handed her a card. "Call me if you ever uncover another truth." Eliana looked down at the card. Around her, the world moved on. But she didn't. She had glimpsed something darker. And she was just getting started. 5 weeks later, the city was buzzing. Headlines celebrated the arrest of Gregory Kane, but the deeper story was being smothered. Evidence of a network, a web of officials, corporate backers, and even members of law enforcement was too complex to be resolved with one arrest. Eliana knew it. And so did Leo. They met in secret now. Sometimes at the library, sometimes in public parks with broken benches. Agent Monroe had warned them, "You've poked a beast that doesn't die easily." Eliana spent her afternoons poring through the ledger. It wasn't just a record of corruption. It was a map, and she intended to follow it. Names emerged: judges, politicians, school board members. They weren't just laundering money. They were shaping the city from behind the curtain. Leo discovered encrypted messages hidden inside the old laptops they recovered from the storage unit. Codes, dates, locations, drop points. They decoded one, a meeting at a marina, just after midnight. They went. What they found chilled them. A man in a dark coat stood handing over a briefcase to someone they couldn't fully see. A whispered name, Barrett, a known real estate mogul. "They're funding redevelopment," Leo murmured. "With stolen money." Eliana recorded everything. They uploaded the files to a hidden drive. Agent Monroe helped create layers of security. "If anything happens to you," she said, "this story still gets out." And something did happen. One morning, Eliana's house was broken into. Her mother screamed. Drawers ransacked. Files missing. But the ledger wasn't in the house. It was with Jay. And the next move had to be big. They needed a witness. Someone from inside. They found one. A janitor named Rufus who once worked for Kane. Nervous. Terrified. But he had access. He gave them something huge. Scanned documents signed by multiple officials, approvals for moving money into shell accounts under the guise of community programs. With Monroe's help, Eliana arranged a media leak. News anchors interrupted programming with exclusive documents. The city reeled. Another arrest. Then another. Still, the deeper layer, the puppeteers behind it all, remained hidden. Until one night, Eliana received a text. "You want the truth? Meet me. Alone." The location, a derelict church. She went. Leo followed, hiding nearby. Inside, a man waited. Silver hair. Piercing eyes. "I knew Kane would fall," he said. "But you? You're a problem." He introduced himself as Mason Weller, a former city planner, the architect of the operation. "Why tell me anything?" Eliana asked. "Because you can't stop it," he smiled. "And you need to understand why." He spoke of control, power, cycles of corruption that outlasted generations. "You think justice came today? Kane was a pawn. Remove him. Another rises. Not if people fight back." He laughed. "People forget. They get scared. Distracted." "Not all of us," she replied. Suddenly, Monroe stepped from the shadows. "You're under arrest." Weller paled. "How?" "Your arrogance. You love to talk." With Weller in custody, the web began to unravel. Weeks passed. Investigations deepened. More arrests. New leadership. Reform. Mr. Thomas returned to teaching. Quietly. Humbly. With pride. Eliana? She was offered opportunities. Interviews. Speaking engagements. She declined most. Instead, she created something new. A youth-led investigative group, teaching kids how to question, research, and hold power accountable. Leo joined. So did others. And Monroe? She became their advisor. On the 1-year anniversary of Kane's trial, Eliana stood outside the courthouse. She looked up at its stone steps and spoke softly. One truth started it all. Imagine what 10 could do. And she smiled. Because the game wasn't over. But this time, they weren't playing alone.